It's happening. Adults across the country can buy cannabis. People have a lot of questions, so I invited some friends over to talk about it. Joining me today is Manisha Krishnan from Vice Canada.
Canadian youth are already consuming cannabis.
Jamie Shaw, a cannabis advisor.
The government has said they don't want to normalize it, despite the fact that that's probably what we should be doing.
And Alan Gertner from Hiku.
We're setting up this really weird paradigm that a parent has to explain to a kid.
I'm Chuck Rafici, and we're talking the biz. The federal government has set 18 as the minimum age to buy cannabis, but the medical community is suggesting 25. What's the right age?
What a physician said for alcohol.
I don't know if they've spoken on that.
But if they were to weigh in, do you think they would universally agree that the age that we've chosen today is the right age? Probably not, right?
25 is ridiculous. I mean, the fact of the matter is that Canadian youth are already consuming cannabis. So if you make the legal age 25, what you're gonna do is criminalize people because they're gonna be using it anyway, and then they're gonna get caught with it and potentially, enter them into the justice system, which is supposed to be the opposite of what our objective is with legalizing it. So I just don't think, but it doesn't seem like any of the provinces are going that direction. Generally speaking, it's been 18, 19.
Well, I think even medically, although 25 is the age where they felt it was safe, they only felt comfortable recommending 21. But even 21 doesn't seem to have stuck.
No, it hasn't at all. And there's a lot of patients registered to licensed producers significantly younger than that. A lot of this is based, we had a Senate report not that long ago that suggested 16 be the actual age. Now, of course, we've got these studies that have been sort of half interpreted to say that, there's changes to the developing brain. We don't actually know that it's damages. When you look at those studies, mostly they say, there's just changes to the developing brain. We don't actually have proof that it's damaging to anybody. I can understand the concern, but basically it's accessible now. And so that's the whole point. Do you want them to be able to access in a safe place or not a safe place? It's a conundrum that we're stuck in. You want to protect them, and so you threaten them. It's like, well, is that really protection? Giving them a record? What are you actually protecting them from, especially if it wasn't actually going to do anything or maybe helped them?
I think it goes back to a lack of cannabis literacy in the medical community, the lack of research, but also there's a lot of doctors who just don't know much about cannabis at all.
Most.
And there's few doctors who really do. So we kind of have to look at where those recommendations are even coming from, and are those people, they may be doctors, are they qualified to even speak on this issue?
So even if we suppose that it was proven beyond a doubt that you should never consume cannabis below 25, people are going to consume it, as we agree. And so it's an issue of just being an adult and making adult choices, right? So should it not just be 18 across the board? Do you agree that is 19 an appropriate age when people can vote at 18? We're legalizing for adult Canadians, yet not all adults can legally buy it?
I think you run into issues when you have an age that's different than with alcohol. We've got Manitoba right now that's saying you have to be a year older to buy cannabis than you do. While 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds, it's not a magic line where they don't hang out with each other anymore. So now you're actually encouraging diversion. They're going to be allowed to hang out in a bar together, but then only half of them are going to be able to go and buy cannabis. It doesn't really make sense, because who are they going to be smoking it with? Probably the same people when they're outside the bar. Right? So why add that extra layer of complication?
It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but then a lot of, laws don't. I think it's just kind of one of those things where it makes the policymakers feel better about themselves and they're being extra cautious, and that's something that they can tell their constituents. I think a lot of it boils down to that.
My concern is less the age, though. I think the age should be in line with alcohol. It's more the education. We have a responsibility to educate people. And then if the age is 16 or 18, it's somewhat irrelevant, because 16-year-olds are going to consume anyways. And so if we set the age at 25, because we assume that's the only right age to consume cannabis, we still have to address this massive amount of consumers who are below that age who are consuming. So we still need to educate them. We still effectively need to build all of the same infrastructure to make sure those consumers can consume safely. So we might as well pick an age that is pragmatic and practical, knowing the reality of the society that we live in, and work against that. The same thing applies with alcohol, right? It's somewhat ludicrous to just randomly pick an age. And if we look at societies that have more liberal alcohol laws, when you look to European countries where they allow kids to consume alcohol potentially at a lower age, it doesn't necessarily lead to more alcoholism because there is more normalization, because there is more education, because it is woven into the fabric of society in a way that is wholly different than the way we currently treat cannabis. So we have a bigger responsibility here, which is to work towards some form of sensible normalization. That's what's going to help the children.
Yeah, no, and the normalization thing is where we start running into trouble, because the government has said they don't want to normalize it, despite the fact that that's probably what we should be doing, actually. To kind of talk a little bit about Vancouver again, there were some really interesting studies that came out, and understand this is an unregulated market, so these are unregulated storefronts. The age of first use of cannabis dropped drastically, like a whole year over the course of a decade, where we went from maybe 10 dispensaries in the entire province to 300 dispensaries in the entire province. Less kids were smoking. It had dropped about 10%. And the age that they first tried it was 17 over 16. So we've got a government that doesn't want to normalize, that doesn't want to be overly criminalizing people anymore for cannabis when it shouldn't be overly criminalized. And they're purposefully getting rid of a model in many places that's been proven to do everything that they're trying to do by driving sales out of any sort of a limelight or anywhere where you can actually see it and regulate it. That's where you start running into problems again.
I do think the government is sending a strong message in that, the penalty for selling to a minor could be up to 14 years of prison time. If you compare that to booting alcohol for a minor, it would normally be a fine. And so I think that is just sending a very, very clear message of how they view alcohol versus how they view cannabis. But what's even more dangerous about that is that I think that it's basically going to extend this form of prohibition and the racism that comes along with that, because I can tell you right now, in 10 years from now, when we're gonna find out who were these penalties applied most harshly to, it's going to be Black and brown men.
I lived in Toronto for many years, and we all used to buy cannabis on the street because there were no dispensaries yet, and the only one of us that ever got arrested was the native guy.
Exactly.
We all went to the same place all the time, right?
That's what happens when you introduce discretion. Like when police have discretion, though, that's exactly what happens. And so I just wanted to point out that, I think that the government is sending some pretty insane messages with some of these rules around, very rigid rules around sort of age.
We're getting change in the law, but not actually in the mindset, not actually in the education or understanding of it. Right?
It seems unreasonable to not treat it the same as alcohol. I think it ultimately sends the wrong message to society and sends the wrong message to children.
But are we not shocked with the age of 19 just because of alcohol? I mean, if the alcohol regime wasn't there, it would seem really odd that we have adults in the country that can't buy cannabis when it's legal, right?
You mean as in you can vote, but you can't buy cannabis?
Yeah, or just to be an adult and you have a product that's legal, but you can't buy it.
But you're defining adult as being someone who can vote?
Well, I mean, if 18's an adult,
Is
right?
it?
Well, you can go to jail as an adult. I mean,
Right.
I think for many people would view 18 as the age of adulthood.
Right.
But I guess that is the question, right? Provinces are determining different ages for adulthood, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that I really struggle with not using alcohol as at least the easiest benchmark because, again, from an education perspective, we're setting up this really weird paradigm that a parent has to explain to a kid, which is that these things are different or maybe they are different, but one is worse because that's the only reason it would have a higher age. It's just because it's worse.
Is anybody going to advocate for an age younger than 18?
Like LS3 or people generally?
Oh, any of you for cannabis?
I don't know.
For medical use, sure. For rec, I just think
medical use, I agree.
there's so many other things that we need to fix first, right? I do think that decriminalizing that kind of Age group is going to be important because if you get rid of prohibition for everybody except the youth, then you're not actually making things a lot better for the future, right?
I mean, the youth are the one group that you do not want to be using illegal product, right? You want the best supply source, right? At least young adults. Young adults.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Used to smoke some really shitty weed when I was a teenager. Some shake.
But it was Vancouver, so put that in context because that's
True,
not.
true.
Yeah.
Yes, smoke some good weed too.
Well, it's about high time we wrap this up for today. Thank you for coming.
Thanks.